Hey everyone, welcome to our latest webinar in our series. Today we're going to be talking about how to make clear presentations, which is kind of weird because a lot of times we take important issues and not that this is not important, but that touch the whole firm. Today we're taking an issue that is a particular problem for consultants in the project. And we hear an awful lot from practice leads, people who have sold an account and then come in to watch what the consultants are doing. The whole. But we as just a class of our industry right now, we're just not very effective at it. So we're doing a lot of work with people right now about what are the building blocks for a clear presentation. Next month, we're going to be taking how to sell professional services, how to sell solutions, how to use ideas to get executive meetings. So that is a more typical topic for us.
A different kind of presentation. But yeah, this one is very much centered around the team knows all the elements of the story. And in fact, they often have way too much information. How do you organize that information into something that communicates the key messages and is compelling for the audience? And there's different tips and tricks that we have around that topic. So
one of the first and most important things to get straight when you're doing this is a combination of two things. Once, and by the way, this is all about clarity and getting the message across, right? So one of the first things you need to know is, why are we even doing this, right? And get that clear. Why are we doing this? Sometimes, and we've been consulting a long time, sometimes it's, hey, we just need to be back in front of the client to bring them up to date. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we need to convince them. Sometimes it's a steering committee meeting. But get the uber message in your mind, the uber reason, and then I would go to what takeaways do we want from them, right? Now, this isn't building the presentation yet. This is a framework that we keep in our mind. So give me an example of a presentation that you had to do in the last maybe year that, what was the key reason and what was the key takeaways we wanted them to have?
Yeah. I mean, I think, right, just a very recent example was, right, this was a workshop style session, and the purpose of it was to obtain alignment on what's the strategy and what investments and activities are already underway. And then most importantly, the exercise and the presentation itself was going to be focused on driving to some deliberate decisions around what we're going to do next year and everybody's role in that process. And so that is totally different than a steering committee meeting, but that dictates what are the key messages that we start with, how do we present the intent and the objective of that conversation, and what are the slide content necessary to tell that story.
You had to clear what we're trying to achieve, and then you could drive all the activities we're going to talk about to that. The other thing is, in the sales cycle, and we get asked this a lot, early in the sales cycle, you might be talking to the client more with a whiteboard, right? And discovering, here's what we think, here's what you think. But somewhere along the way, you're either going to use some material that's already available, or you might be tailoring it to that unique situation. This fits well in the tailoring, but obviously if it's something that's pre-done by your marketing department, that's a different thing. So the first thing we want to do, though, is, and we use this called a message back storyboard. So the first thing we want to do is, and we literally take stickies. And I'm going to get to the slide because this would be a good slide for people to see. And I think everybody has the deck. So either you're looking at it or you're not, but this is slide 14. But go ahead and take the time to put down all the thoughts you have, right? Just get them all out. Sometimes you might want to do this as if it's a team. And you want the junior people to understand, or you're trying to convince some more senior people. So you might do it as a team, but the most important thing is to get all those thoughts out, everything you might want to say, because what we want to do is use that as a way to see themes. We want to use that as a way to cut out the fat, the things that aren't strategically important to put into the presentation. Now, one thing I get a lot of feedback as we teach this is, gee, when you guys talk about it, it seems to take more time than making the presentation without doing these activities. Not true. No. It's actually, if you get good at this, this takes a lot less time and a lot less rework because you can defend internally why you have done it this way, right? So the first thing we want to do is get all, and this is particularly the example we're using is the client's trying to decide to build or not build an internal process improvement organization. And that's just an easy one to have taken. But as you can see here, there are financial issues, there are cultural issues, there when should you do this, when should you not do this, who's against it, who's for it, who does it help. So all those are just thoughts that we would get out onto the so going back to your example, what are some thoughts that originally you thought might go into helping your client plan the next year's activities to continue their transformation?
Yeah. So I mean, I think a handful of things, right? One is the progress made so far, year to date, right? How have we progressed towards goals and outcomes, right? Some other things are market dynamics and challenges that we're seeing in the market. Some other thoughts that we definitely wanted to get across was that certain products were less likely to perform despite goals and aspirations that the team might have. And so that's one that you have to weave into some of those different things. So there's a bunch, there was a bunch there, right? And then there's some more subtle things like where investments have already been decided that need to not be communicated, but we need to get buy-in for a decision that's already been made, but we want the team to be a part of that decision-making process. So there's often...
So did I hear that right? We've made a decision. I understand what we're saying. What we're saying is this is a fait accompli, but let's make sure, one, we can validate we didn't miss something or the client didn't miss something, and two, everybody wants to
and of course we can always those decisions can always be changed, but it would take a real strong argument against it
and that's a really good point. And I like the kinds of things you threw out. So there's strategic and tactical things that we would have put on this page that may make it and not make it, right? So one thing that may make it on a given client is management's not aligned to what they're trying to do. Right? Yeah. Well, that might make it. That might be important, but not make this presentation. But it would lead me to where I've got to. On my communication plan, where do I need my client to understand that? Yeah. So there's value to these things, even if they don't make the presentation, because it's a clearinghouse of all your thoughts.
Yeah, and we tend to do this really well when we are working as a team, as you mentioned, and the time where I see this missed most often is when you're doing a presentation by yourself, or at least the first draft of the presentation by yourself. You end up jumping straight to, I know all the key things I want to say, and I'm going to incorporate.
I'm going to start making slides.
I'm just going to start putting things together, and that is a right. Despite you doing it yourself, right? It's somewhat therapeutic, but it's also very helpful to get all the thoughts out that you want to communicate, because there are so few chances that we have with clients to have organized communications to most of these audiences that we're talking to.
Absolutely, and it's a discipline issue. Yeah, it's but you and I both being in the business a long time, as you know, I started during World War II, so. When we look at someone's presentation, the first draft of it, and I know you've heard me say this, I often find myself going, well, why is this here? And then they tell me why it's there, and I say, well, it doesn't say that. Right. So in their mind, they had a journey, but they didn't. So now let's take we've done the explosion of all our thoughts. That should inform us to the first level of structure. If it doesn't, so let's take that first. I've got them out here. They don't seem to make any structure. What I do then is I start grouping them differently on subtopics, right? I just, until I emerge into, I kind of see the story, right? And then I on this slide, if you look about it in this story, it became very clear by the stickies is this idea viable? Is it valuable? Is it implementable? And will it last? Well, the good news is that was a good structure. But I've done these before where I get that done and I don't like it. Right. So again, we're not wasting time doing the presentation, and we're not building a presentation that drives our clients crazy. And by the way, it's not just consulting firms that have mentioned this to us. I was on a phone call with a president of a $30 billion company a couple of days ago, and he was talking about some consulting presentations he'd just seen, and he said he couldn't make heads or tails. I said, well, how many slides were there?
Yeah.
Right. What, and what happened was they had a lot to say, and it was on manufacturing. So there was a lot of good detail, but it was just too confusing. Right. So, and don't make the burden on ourselves. Don't worry about the presentation being confusing. I'll make up for it in my presentation. That's not fair. That's not fair, because they're going to take that document and show it to people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You have to assume that that's going to stand on its own without you at some point.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about level of detail, providing we have information. But if you look at the slide we've just been talking about, we would call this mid-level of detail, right? So I'm explaining, but if I needed to explain more, I would have that in the appendix in this case. And there's a place for mid-level. There's a place for bullet points only, and we'll talk about that. I just wanted to pick on that because it was here at this time.
Yeah, and part of this is, right, the key message is, what are we trying to say? What is the key thing that we need to get accomplished and across? And we talked about this in our last session. And then support that with detail if and when asked or when appropriate.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
We do have a tendency, because our work is so much in the details, to say, as consultants, here's all of the work and the process that went into getting to the answer and burying the lead. And we need to flip that thinking, because most of the executives that we're interacting with when we're sharing these updates care about, why are you talking to me about this? And then tell me everything I need to know about it.
Absolutely. And two big points you just brought up. One is, the higher you go in an organization, the more auditory they are, right? So auditory like cascading communication. What's the tagline? And then, but also you brought up is, if you really want them to understand, make them involve themselves. Don't give them all the answers.
Yeah.
Don't give them all the detail. Make them go, well, why is that true?
Yeah.
And then you can bring up the analytics or whatever.
Yeah, be prepared to answer all those questions. But I'm sure many of us have been in a room where we've given a presentation and you get a bunch of blank stares back on it, even though it's a topic that should be interesting to them. It's because we've either confused them, or, to the point we just made, you've provided too much detail, so they don't have a compelling reason to ask a question,
or they're bored
to participate in the conversation.
They're bored, and you've worn them down. They're just trying to leave the room.
Yeah.
All right. So on this slide, we begin the process of mapping our ideas to the organization, right?
Yeah.
So we take all our stickies and map. I mean, I know this seems almost juvenile, but it's really valuable, because now I see what fits and doesn't fit, and I can reevaluate my structure. Oh, my structure doesn't allow for me to talk about this. How important is that? That's the opportunity to redo the structure, but the structure also helps me cut out all the stuff I want to say that you don't really need to say, right? And if you told, and I think you'll agree with this, if I told someone, I'm going to the store, that is clear and concise, and they got it or they didn't, and they can ask me a question. But if I tell them I'm going to the store to get eggs and bacon and chicken and dogs, and I'm going to go to the one that's over there, and I might stop on the way, is my message I'm going to the store?
Yeah.
Because I've lost them.
Yeah.
And they don't care. They just want me to leave. They just want me to leave, go to the store.
They know you're getting eggs, but they don't know anything else about what you just said.
They don't even know if I'm...
Yeah. So at the end of this stage, I think a helpful exercise, especially if you're going to have to be reviewing this document yourself, right? And we always would encourage you to get a second set of eyes on it after you spend time in it. But sometimes the situation doesn't permit for that. At this stage, I think it's really helpful to write out, what is our... If you had a tagline or a message bar for each component of your story, right, this ultimately becomes your slides. What is the message bar for this section of it? So that when you're done with the presentation, you can come back here once it's been organized and make sure that if that message doesn't jump off the page, then we need to rework that page.
Absolutely. Once you put your sticky notes on there and you've resolved, and some of those will still come off, right? Or they'll be in an appendix. You must say, what is my storyboard now? Yeah. Only now can I make my storyboard. My storyboard is, in this case, we were talking about, is it viable? Could we even do this?
Yeah.
Right. And then, where has it failed? Right. Why does it succeed? And then is it valuable? I mean, that's the next section. I mean, you get to, is it financially worth buying, as opposed to using contractors? Or, so you bring that clarity in, and then you can start doing your slides.
Yep.
So Now, if you'll go to the storyboard, which is the slide we have up now, that begins to do what we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But when you, and the next stage is actually building slides. So, but when you get to building slides, there is a level of detail and a visual component. And again, this one's a mid-level of detail. That's what we're using for this particular story. And we're doing that on purpose because we want people to be able to take it away, study it, think about it, share. Mm-hmm. So we're not heavily appendix oriented and bullet point oriented. There's a reason for that. So just stay on that a second. If you look at the continuum of complexity of what we have to say, complexity of decisions, and level of information combined with where my listeners are today in my story, right? So if they've been working with us closely, it's a steering committee, maybe they're in my story, I just need bullet points and then an appendix they can go to. But they're not in my story, I might want to have a mid-level, and then I need to have the visuals that help carry the story. So talk about that a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the simplest example of that is, right, as you think about presentations to really large audiences, right, where your goal is to inform, maybe motivate, maybe inspire, right, you're going to have to go through the same exercise of telling the story, but the content should come out in your presentation, and it shouldn't be people focusing on the document, because that document and that presentation doesn't have to live on its own after that presentation.
Like a keynote speech or something. Yeah.
Which is very different than you are explaining a detailed recommendation of what an organization needs to do to improve a specific process. That is a document that is not only a presentation maybe initially, but also might become the playbook and the guide that they use to lead them through that journey on their own without you in the room. Yeah. And so finding that
right, sell other people.
Right. And so finding that right balance there is really important, and why you would do things differently. And in some cases, we find ourselves in a hybrid where we don't want to lose the audience in detail, but we need all of that content in there in case that document must stand on its own. And so you would tell the same story, but you would put together two versions of that presentation.
Absolutely.
One without all of the content in detail, just with the important visuals and elements. And then after the meeting, or even before the meeting, you would send out the detailed version. Or
as a handout in the meeting.
Yeah, you would send out that detailed version.
Absolutely. And I love that, using that juxtaposed, just to reemphasize that, is in the meeting, you could literally have your visuals and bullet points and still give them a medium size with appendices document to take with them. And again, it goes back to what we said first. What's the outcomes we're trying to drive? Right. And some on their personality, right? So we have a client that everything is, all visuals are done the exact same way with the exact same number of slides in their belief on how you talk about things. Great. You can still do everything we want to do. You have appendices, you have documents that can be sent before the meeting, but in the meeting itself, you obey the 4-page limit they have, and each one's a 2x2. It's a very, very, very interesting client, but they run the world that way, and they're big. So, yeah. So, hey, let's talk about other things. I just want to summarize this again. It's a pretty simple toolkit as compared to like how to create an offer or something. And the toolkit is, take your time to get all your messages out. You're building a storyboard, right? And then slides. Once you get them out, find the flow of the document. Once you find the flow of the document, bring your ideas back in, trim it. Then you're able to say, and then your ideas can go to the background, and you're able to say, what are the messages now? What's my storyboard for each of my things? Always be willing to go and redo, right? And this can be very fast. Always be willing to go redo. Then you can make your slides. And as you said, you pick what the level of detail and your appendix and that kind of things. And then visuals, we tend to like visuals that are models or tell the story. We don't use as much eye candy, but if your deck is 80%, if every slide needs a visual, sometimes eye candy is fine for us. Yeah. And you'll see that with us. But most of the time we'll do like on this slide where we're actually we're enhancing the story with the visual. And we find that is very helpful. I did see a consulting presentation recently that was only visuals and very simple visuals. And I hadn't seen that before. So I'm going to let that mature in the market a little bit and see how that goes. They got paid a lot for it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Another thing, visual specific graphs and graphics are the things that I think are most often misused or used in a way that actually distracts from your story, but they could be the most powerful thing. So graphs and charts. So labeling becomes critically important in those. Making sure that everything is very clearly visible in that is really important. And acknowledging that despite how senior in an organization somebody is or how long they've been doing something, if it's a type of chart that they are unfamiliar with seeing, they're going to take a lot of time to process what's actually being shown there and not listening to you or not seeing anything else that's happening in that. So use the standards, use ones that are standards and norms of your client as you begin to understand them more often. That it's super important because they cause a lot of distraction, but they should be your most powerful asset.
That's a great thing. I just helped a client with this, a consulting firm.
Yeah.
And what we did was we took and they're a very math oriented firm. We took all their math back to the appendices and only brought up the numbers that were outcomes that drove. And the first time they gave it, the client was extremely appreciative because it's been a long-term client, but asked them specific, but not about every one. Mm-hmm. I'd like to understand that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that helps. But you're right. I mean, particularly, and there's a lot of tools we have like spider diagrams and everything. Again, try to find the tools that tell the story, but also not going to cause distraction in the room. Another thing that you're really good at pushing people for is the right titles.
Yeah.
And I know people take that for granted, but titles matter and taglines matter.
Yeah. Yeah. No, titles and taglines. I believe that, right, in a presentation.
I'm a little worried you won't like my title on this slide.
Yeah. Clarity of title and what we're trying to get across is important, especially when the document stands on its own, because if somebody is flipping through a document trying to look for something or just reading a document that you may send in advance, the typical time that somebody spins on a slide, even if it has all these words on it, is about 15 seconds. And so if your message bar and your title don't convey what you're talking about here, and that doesn't help progress the story, if you can't look at the titles across your document and your message bars, if you're using those and know exactly what the story is all about, then you run the risk of confusing somebody that is going through your document too quickly. And I think it's a good check at the end to make sure that aligns with the storyboard that you put together in the beginning.
I think some of that comes from people have a good slide, have a good message, mm-hmm. and then they want to keep telling it, mm-hmm. right? And that's probably not necessary.
Yeah.
Right? Again, that could be answering questions they ask. Yeah. I'm not saying it is, but I've seen so much that, I got that. Yeah, that's the same. Okay, I'm on the fourth slide, and it's the same story and the same said differently or more detail, but I already got it.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to talk about before we kind of queue up, kind of some summaries and takeaways?
Yeah. Maybe your take on the use of an executive summary as a part of a document or presentation, right? What length does that need to be? Is that right? Because very often, especially when it's a large report out, we tend to say, all right, well, let's put it one slide together at the beginning that tells the entire story. And that could take the entire presentation if you say, right? There's pros and cons.
Yeah. It's almost like the super energized use of appendix because you made your whole presentation
in one page
and an appendix. Well, so I'm going to talk about different hearers of that.
Yep.
Our private equity clients, they love that because they pride themselves on fast learners, very intellectually aggressive people. That's the story. If I have questions, I'll ask you. For our bigger accounts, they are used to those. And I kind of feel like, depending on the breadth and depth, it's a couple of pages. Mm-hmm. But I did see some executive summaries that were whole presentations, and I really didn't understand.
Yeah, 15, 20 pages.
I didn't understand what that was. Boy, that must be a big topic, right? How to feed the world, Uh-huh. But some takeaways. So we leave you. We always want to be actionable. So listen, literally, go and ask if you're early in your career. Go and get the chance to do a presentation this way. Go look at a presentation you've already done, and redo it. If you're on a team, get them to get the thoughts out and get them organized this way. We guarantee It's going to make a big, easy tool set, big difference in the impact you'll make. So again, next week.
Next month.
Next week? No, next month. We're going to take on a very important topic, which we as a matter of fact, it was probably the first topic the firm took on 30 years ago, which is selling professional services, getting into the executive office, making the executives buy in, how to use ideas to separate yourself from other people, how that becomes a differentiation for you. So not everything about, but a good introduction to best in class selling professional services.
Yep. Can't wait.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.